Hey Larry, how you doing?
Great, Chad. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. So I'm
Good.
excited. I think we got something interesting today. This will be a little bit longer for people that are tuning in, but typically we take this platform and this opportunity to talk about tips and tools and concepts for leadership and how you can improve your leadership skills. Very leadership driven in the way we've approached this. Today we're going to do something a little bit different, which I think is a great idea, and talk about some streaming content that is out in streaming platform of Netflix, a small mini series called Stutz, and I'm really excited to talk about it because I think it really does lend itself to that self-limiting beliefs and those mental challenges that we apply to ourselves, which can impact us as leaders. So, with that, I'm excited to jump into it, and I'm going to let you kind of take the ball and run with it.
Yeah, that's great. So, $10,000 question, as I usually say in these
Yeah.
conversations. Did you see the series?
I did. I remember watching it. It came out probably like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, something like
Yeah,
that. And yeah, I watched
I
it
think it was
right away. It's
2000.
fascinating.
I think it was
2000. Yeah, that shows you
2022.
how much time flies, right?
No, 2022. So it wasn't
22.
that long
Okay.
ago. But
Yeah.
and these things hang out there in the streaming sphere. So,
Yeah.
you could access them anytime. So it is really cool to be talking about this because I almost feel like we're doing a little bit of a review, but in the spirit of what we do on Lean and Leaders, we're really trying to give people we're extracting content and ideas for people to apply, right?
Yeah.
So the cool thing about this is that you don't have to be a therapist. You don't have to be a coach. You don't have to be an expert in leadership. But of course, we're some and all of a little bit of all of that between yourself and I. So I thought, in the spirit of what we try to do on Lean and Leaders, is try to connect it to leadership at some point.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
if for anyone who we're going to encourage that for anyone who didn't watch it, it's only an hour and 30 or 20 some minutes. So we're
Yeah.
going to do a little less than one third of that in our conversation
We
today,
hope.
but we'll still give you an abridged version
Yeah.
of that. And what we're going to do, Shad, is we're going to cover in the docuseries, it covers three call them dimensions. Jonah Hill, as he's interviewing and talking to his psychiatrist, Phil Stutz, talks about his very unique application and way of working with people. And he talks about these things called the realities. He talks about these things called the tools. And then he talks about this other dimension of work called the work. We're not going to talk about the work in this in Lean and Leaders segment. It's really just to build on the tools. And I think if we talk about the realities and the tools, we're going to be,
Yeah.
golden. And I think our listeners will extract some, important takeaways. So,
Yeah.
with that said, what I found real quickly before we get into it is that it was sticky. And, I
Yeah.
felt like there were things I, as much as I know about psychology and leadership and coaching, I felt so inspired and absolutely kind of energized when I watched it. And I watched it at least three times because I'm like, I know this stuff, but the way he positions it and the way he makes it so practical,
Yeah.
I got super excited. And that's one
Yeah.
of the reasons I thought it would be great to share the insights on lean leaders.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it really resonates. It really resonates with me, and I think part of it too is, which is fascinating. And just to give a little bit of background on the show, this is Phil Stutz is Jonah Hill's personal psychologist. He's a psychologist, not a psychiatrist, but a
Psychiatrist.
psychologist.
Yeah, he's a
He's a psychiatrist,
psychiatrist. Mhm.
and he was kind of well known. And I think it's kind of fascinating because we look at entertainers, performers, and we assume that there are no flaws, no limitations. And Jonah Hill is very transparent in kind of the limiting thoughts and beliefs and the little internal demons he's had, and how these have really helped him move forward. So I think that relevance too, it's very practical. I mean, the stuff that, and you'll have to watch it if you're tuning into this, tune into that. I don't think we'll get into too much, but like the stick figure drawings just make it so simple, and it just
Right.
hits home, and you're like, yeah, that I get
Yeah.
that makes
Yeah.
sense to me, and so I think that is a great way, and if you put it on with the filter of like, how do I do this as a leader, realize that even those of us that are wildly successful have the same little demons that everybody else does. It's very practical to use.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's the kind of pull through for us in Lean In Leaders, because
Yeah.
when I know that sometimes this phraseology is overused, so I'm not going to apologize for it, but because I still think it makes sense when you think of the concept of putting your mask on first.
Yeah.
This really
Yeah.
is about putting your mask on first. And it really talks about, I want to preface this too by saying we're not trying to be armchair psychologists in Lean In Leaders,
Not at all.
and but Stutz is a psychiatrist, but the tools he talks about could be used by anyone.
Anybody. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what makes it just so, incredibly attractive. And what we're trying to solve for when we talk about the strategies and the concepts that we cover on our podcast and our content share is really addressing what's referred to in positive psychology and just psychology in general. Is we're dealing with somewhere between flourishing and languishing. Whereas when we're talking about mental illness, we're talking about struggling and floundering.
Yeah.
So in the context of what we're trying to talk about here, we're focusing on that, that languishing all the way up to flourishing, which is stuff that we're all dealing with every day. And how do we just get better at not spiraling down? And
Yeah.
when we do, how do we rebound and realign more quickly than not? So that's
Yeah.
kind of important backdrop
Yeah. I
and
think
helpful
that's
to
great.
just think of, how we think of our own mental health, and to we talk about peak performance. That's how you are
Yeah.
able to perform more
Yeah.
consistently and just better, and get more joy out of whatever it is that you are doing. So
Yeah.
on that note, let's just talk for a couple minutes about the first part of Stutz's, let's call it a framework or model,
Yeah.
and it's the realities. And he talks about three realities. So I'll cover I'll just say what they are, and then I'll do a quick breakdown. So the realities, the first part of the realities that he talks about are the aspects of reality. Then he talks about this next reality is called life force. And the third is called part X. So let's just take a minute and break each one down, because this is really important, because when you focus and understand and appreciate the realities, that's what allows you to just perform and use the tools more effectively. So
Mm-hmm.
the first reality is actually called the aspects of reality. And what Stutz talks about here is these three things that are always at play for any of us. And he talks about the fact that all of us are going to experience at some point in time, to different degrees, pain.
Yep.
We're always going to experience uncertainty,
Mm-hmm.
and we're always going to have to put in constant work. So basically, he uses this as a foundation, and saying that these things are just entirely universal to being human. And that when we face these realities, that in true that some people are going to have more hills and higher hills, and they're going to be on them for longer periods of time. But at the end of the day, when we accept these realities, these aspects of realities, we're better prepared to handle them. And we don't think of them as, we talked about catastrophizing and other things like before in the three P's, where
Yeah.
why me? But if we say, like, yeah, this is going to happen, I'm having
Yeah.
a bad day, or
Yeah.
I'm having a bad stretch of days, or a bad experience in
Yeah.
life, and I'm not experiencing as much joy or success, but knowing that that's part of being human is
Yeah.
a kind of a reset, and it gives you a stronger foundation of what is the reality that we all experience as humans. So the aspects of reality, pain, uncertainty, and constant work, is the first part of the reality framework. The second,
Can I
yeah,
jump in there and talk about from a leadership perspective? Because when you're saying that, and this just hit me when you were saying that, those aspects of reality, that you're going to experience some type of pain, you're going to experience some type of change, and there is work to be done. I interpret that, and I have a client that I've worked with recently that, I want to say this the right way, that doesn't feel like maybe they have something to learn in every experience. They've been so experienced as a leader that they've learned it all, right? And that aspects of reality suggests that that aspect of doing work may be that you have to learn something new, whether it's a communication style or a different approach or whatever that may be. But being able to anticipate that as a leader, to say, this may be uncomfortable, and we're going to have to do things a different way. But I'm going to learn something from that as well too, or I need to learn something from that. Better prepares you as a leader to anticipate, adjust, and be flexible and change. And it
I
moves
think
you
that's a
closer
great,
from that
yeah,
languishing to maybe more flourishing, right?
I think that's a great point. And
It's
then
a great,
again, we talk about this a lot, Chad, the importance for the leader of modeling that for others as well.
yes,
And getting to
yes,
your point, I think what part of what you were saying is, I think that's why Stutz calls it constant work, not just
yeah,
work,
yeah,
and you just, it's ever evolving.
yeah,
And then I think what you just touched on, whether you meant to or not, you took me there when we talked about servant leadership, when we talked about humility and the
yeah.
fact that you may think you know everything. You may have great depth of knowledge and mastery around, the technical side or even
The business side, the financial
the
side, yeah.
business
But if you
side,
don't
the
have it all,
leadership.
yeah,
Yeah, but you can still learn from people all the time.
yeah,
And I think
yeah,
that's the important
absolutely,
thing. It's when leaders think that they know it all is when they stop learning.
exactly
So
right.
that's the connection here.
Yeah,
When Stutz talks about constant work, we could extrapolate from that and say, hey, leaders, you always have to be learning. Like
yeah,
that should be a major value,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because if you
yeah,
don't model that, then other people might
yeah,
think that it's just you get there
yeah,
and it stops. No,
yeah,
it's just the beginning, right?
yeah,
It's not linear. So
yeah,
that's a great
yeah,
connection to the leadership dimension. So
yeah,
thanks for bringing that up.
absolutely.
So again, aspects of reality, first part of the reality, the three part componentry. The second is he talks about life force. And this is really interesting. And he draws this out in the form of a pyramid, if you remember. And
Uh-huh.
at the bottom of the pyramid, he talks about the relationship of the body. He talks about this pyramid, this three building block pyramid, about different levels of relationships. The body is on the lower portion. Then he talks about the relationship with others in the middle, and at the top of the pyramid, pardon me, the relationship with yourself. So there in the Netflix series, there's a heavy emphasis on the body part, where he really talks about, especially with Jonah Hill, how movement is so important in so many aspects of life, and that just doing one little thing to like move your body is so critical. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of what he talks about. Like he emphasizes that in the model when he talks about the life force. But the key about the life force is moving your body. And what was important to Jonah Hill in this particular segment is Jonah Hill talked about the fact that he always thought exercise was just about physical. And what the light bulb moment for him was, wait a minute, when I'm moving, when I'm exercising, it's more about this. Or
Yeah,
as much to do about this as anything else. And he kind of laments and says, boy, if I would have known that, I
yeah,
would have approached exercise and movement
yeah, yeah. It's
totally
true.
differently.
Yeah,
So I think that's really powerful. And then he starts talking about at the next level, he starts talking about the relationship that you have with others and how important that is in different dimensions. And then again,
right.
at the top of that pyramid, he talks about the relationship that you have with yourself and kind of tuning into yourself differently. But that's the life force. That's the second component. But what's critical there, he really does double down and talk about how this life force is an incredibly important part of this model when he works with his clients as well, because the more effective you are exercising and marshaling energy
Mm-hmm.
around the life force,
Mm-hmm.
the more able and successful you are going to be navigating the pain, uncertainty, and
Yeah,
constant work. And there's
yeah,
that tie in. And then the third reality that he talks about is called part X. So we've talked about this before in Leaner and Leaders as well, whether we call it the internal critic, the inner dialogue,
yeah,
running like bad space in your head, whatever it
yeah,
is.
yeah.
It's really about that internal talk track that's telling you you're not good enough,
Mm-hmm.
you're not worthy, you really can't accomplish what you're setting out to do.
Yeah,
So that's the backdrop. So that's really like the reality part of his model. And then he goes into the tools, which is the real big action oriented part of his model. And there he really talks about four different tools that are the stick figures you talked about earlier. This one,
yeah,
he
yeah,
draws
yeah,
these
yeah.
stick figures out for his clients, and they're the next step of the realities, right? So they're like mini visualization exercises that someone could employ right on the spot in real time, and they can imagine, these different images that he draws out for them, and they could, think about what that meant as a way of essentially changing their mood in the moment and then having a carryover effect. So let me give you the 4 tools he talks about in the show. The first is called the maze. And the maze is essentially this image that you have of yourself, and you're looking ahead at your life, and you're either thinking of yourself in forward motion, or you're thinking of yourself kind of traveling through this circular maze and not moving forward. So the idea is that you are wanting to constantly take small steps moving forward and not getting stuck in the maze. Because when you're stuck in the maze, you're basically stuck in the past. And when you do that, you can't move forward. So I think that's the distinction he's creating in that particular tool. It's this idea of don't get caught up in the maze. It's about forward motion, advancing your life, aspects of your life, small steps, even at that. I think from a leadership perspective, if we want to extrapolate again into the leadership realm, I think one of the questions we should be asking ourselves is, am I doing things that are moving me forward or keeping me stuck in the past? And I think that's a key insight. If we want to think of what question would I ask myself to challenge, am I moving forward, or am I finding myself getting stuck in that circular maze and living in the past too often or too much?
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. And I certainly talk about it with the clients I work on, and you and I have talked about the concept I utilize, which I think you kind of allude to when you say just taking one step at a forward and just keep moving forward. Talk about just doing 1%, right? Just be a little bit better today than you were yesterday. Just don't look behind, but how do I just move forward? And I think people think about that idea about making progress. It has to happen now, or I need to have the answer now. And sometimes it's just taking another step in that maze that gets you to the right connection, right, or the right hallway. I heard this interesting analogy the other day, which I think fits this really well. In that a gentleman was describing kind of we get stuck in our own way and we're not making progress when we always look to the past. So similar to the maze, right? And the idea was, the visualization he gave was, imagine that you're standing on the stern of a boat and you're looking at the wake. So you're in the back of the boat and you're looking out behind you and you're looking at the wake that's left behind. That's your past. That's all that's happened to you in the past. The experiences you had in leadership perspective. Maybe it's the hire you made, or the meeting that you didn't speak up where you felt bad and you should have said something. Whatever that is, that's the wake. And if we stand and look at the back of the boat, at the wake of the wave is not what moves the boat forward. It's when we're standing looking forward that the boat moves in the right direction. When we look behind, all we see is where we've been. And I think that's kind of the same analogy, right? It's don't get stuck in what happened before, because it's not going to happen again. It's not a self-fulfilling prophecy unless you make it that.
Yeah, that's a good visual. I don't know if that would count as a Stutz visual where we have
No. That's way more than a complicated stick figure. But I can't draw boats. So.
I love that. It does remind me of the old saying, and I've written about this before in other posts, where it's like, that's why the rear view mirror is so small and the windshield is big. Same kind of concept. So the key there, again, with the first tool, which is the maze, is don't get stuck in the maze. Because if you're stuck in the maze, you're stuck in the past and you can't move forward. Yeah. And again, that's where like activating the life force, putting perspective around pain, uncertainty, and constant work is like the foundation of, activating capabilities so that you're not getting stuck in the past. The second, and you were going right there, is a great build. It's called the string of pearls. That's the second tool that Stutz talks about and Jonah Hill talks about. And this idea of visualizing, taking one step forward, like all the time. Yeah. And the way he does it is he talks about adding a pearl onto a string. Mm-hmm. And even if it's something as simple, like if you're really struggling with something and you know that if you just did this one thing, like took a baby step, it would be something. It would be, and to force yourself, challenge yourself to add that string, but or add that pearl onto the string. Yeah. There's 2 rules in this kind of tool. One is that someone else can't add the pearl for you. You
Yeah.
got to do it
Yeah.
yourself,
Yeah.
right? So it's, you have to take that action. The second is, and I'm not going to go into detail, but it talks about like the pearl not being necessarily clean inside, and there's
Yeah.
some, it's whether it's murky or some
Yeah.
object in
Yep.
the
Yep. Yep.
in the in the pearl. But what he talks about is, don't not put this pearl on the string because it's not perfect.
Right.
It's not about being perfect. It's about the intent, and
Yeah.
it's about the action
Yeah.
of that 1% or that one pearl.
Yeah.
So that's the second
Yeah.
tool. The third tool is called a snapshot. And this is an interesting one because I think we all struggle with this a lot more than we think about or even reflect on. And that's this idea that we're chasing like this perfect state, this perfect experience. And we take this static image of what it looks like when we think, okay, I'll be okay then,
When? Yeah.
instead
When?
of like present. And when we do that, I wasn't even going to go here, but just think about mindfulness and presence and when you're not. And this snapshot is this picture that we create in our mind's eye, and it's what we think we should be or aspire to. And it's not suggesting that aspiring to something, and having goals isn't important. We talk about
Yeah.
that all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but it becomes a little messy, or has a counterbalancing or a negative effect, I should say, when we say, I'll only be okay when, or I'll feel happy when, or be happy when, or be satisfied. And the reality is, the realities, pain, uncertainty, and constant work tell you that there is no
There's
perfect
no when.
state.
Yeah.
Right. So that's that no time like the present. So this idea that, you acknowledge that we are oftentimes in our mind, and it's usually part X, that inner critic that's feeding this snapshot, right? Because it wants you to think you'll only be okay when. The reality is that we try to combat that snapshot because and realize that there is no perfect. You can aspire to things, but it's not about being happy or being satisfied or feeling you're like you're only worthy when you get to that spot. So that's the third tool. And then the last tool is called a shadow. And I'm going to lightweight this one because it's a little murkier, but it's this idea that you kind of envision a silhouette of your body, and then inside that is a shadow of your body. And this is the part that he talks about that's a little deeper in the psychology and psychiatry of the human being. But he talks about those parts that you're ashamed of, even is the language he uses, or you're just not feeling so good about. Again, this has a lot to do with the self-talk, the part X, and what it's telling us. So the idea here is that we're just paying attention to that internal talk track about how we're suggesting that we're not enough, right? And that we're asking ourselves and checking in, like, am I engaging with, or at least aware of, what that messaging is that I'm giving myself? Because I don't let it have a counter or negative effect on, my well-being, my psychology, my psyche. So that is like the fourth tool that he talks about in the Netflix series before he goes on to the work that which we're not going to cover in this.
So in that last one, doesn't that also kind of relate to when you say, it being importance of getting in touch with parts of you that you're not proud of? Doesn't that also kind of tie itself to just being okay being you and being authentic, right? I think I mean, and so when that, because that tool in and of itself requires us to be self-reflective, to be honest about who we are, and just understand that, hey, I'm okay with who I am. I may not be the best. I look when it comes to writing, I'm horrible at grammar. I write like I talk, and I mean, I'm okay. I mean, I have to be honest with that and be okay with that, and I have to own that. If I don't, and I try and hide that, I limit what I can be. And I think we've talked about this in previous content where we talk about being authentic. And authenticity, as this tool relates to leadership, being authentic and being honest and self-reflective about what I am and what I'm not and what I aspire to be, and understand I'm not going to be perfect at all that. All those pieces to put together really helps you kind of get out of your own way.
I love that. And that, I don't think I said this earlier, Shab, but the inference is very clear that the realities that we talked about in the beginning, the life
Yeah.
force, the aspects of reality, and the part X, they connect to the tools. And what you just talked about was the top of the life force, the relationship with self.
Yeah.
So but again, I think that's where also this idea of like being aware of that part X
Yeah.
and battling that part X. So
Yeah.
it it doesn't tell you that no, you're not going to be okay until you get to this point
Right.
of evolution. And as it relates to the shadow, what you just pointed out, where it's like, I know I'm not perfect. I'm
Yeah.
okay with that. Doesn't
Yeah.
mean I'm not going to strive to be better
Yeah.
and do better and be
And it
something
doesn't mean
else,
that I
but it doesn't
can't.
mean
Yeah. I just got to
exactly.
be aware that that's part of who I am.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And boy, isn't that liberating. So
Yeah.
let me just do something that I thought about as a recap, and I literally distilled it down to two things.
Yeah.
And this is what I got when I probably watched it for the third time, and I just walked away and thought, how could I really distill it? And I think about the recapping the model in these two statements. One is in terms of the realities, which
Mm-hmm.
we've been talking about. I won't repeat them again, but it's use the realities to build perspective and a stronger foundation so that we have a stronger set point for our mental health.
Yeah.
Again, because to me, the realities are all about building perspective. Secondly, use the tools that are really about mindsets that we could adopt and
Yeah.
use them to fuel
Yeah.
transformation so that we can create these states that we're talking about. Because so much we talk about state-like behavior, not just traits. So how do we use the realities to build perspective, and how do we use the tools to fuel our mindsets?
Yeah. I think
That's
that's
the way
great.
I really kind of distill this model down. And I know we talked about, we riffed a lot on this
Yeah.
today, which
That's
was
okay.
really great dialogue. Really enjoyed it. It was the first time we did a review
Yeah.
of a series or a streaming platform, or I should say streaming content. We'll probably do more at some point if it's the right thing to do, or at
Yeah.
least in terms of what we think we could share and add value. But I thought this was awesome to talk about this today.
Yeah, I think great for bringing it up, and I appreciate you bringing it up. And I think we did kind of we're a little bit all over the place, but I think that's the reality of kind of how people think and lead anyway, right? And being able to just to kind of it's dialogue and it's that internal dialogue. And I think the tools I like I said when I watched it, it resonated. I mean, there's a lot of things I saw and I went, oh wow, yeah, I do that, you know,
Yeah.
and man, just anybody can take that away. So I think it's great. I would encourage people, if you've not seen it, go watch it. It's great leadership homework. It's great
Yeah,
personal
I
development
agree.
homework.
And though we may have been as long as the series
Yeah.
in this delivery, it was our
That's okay.
perspective.
We're not, well, we're in color. Most of that was black and white. So, I mean, you got
Exactly.
that. But no, it's great. And I think if you liked this, please comment on our social media platforms that we're on, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's our YouTube page. If you liked any of this content, you want more like that, let us know. What we're trying to really do is bring content to leaders. Instead of you trying out to figure out the next steps, give you a resource to go find the next steps or easily access the next steps. And I think it boils down to what we're trying to do in our mission is that you can always learn, no matter if you're a Fortune 500, Fortune 100 CEO, or you're a first time entry level leader. We all have things that we can learn. More importantly, we have things that we can remember. And probably most importantly, there are things that we should forget, whether it's in the maze or in the wake. Right. So
Yeah.
there's a lot that we want to throw at you, but we want to make it meaningful for you. Things that we want to keep doing for you is this kind of content, whether it is streaming platforms, whether it is book reviews in the future, whether it is interviews with known experts in the field. We hope to aspire to be to that someday. Or whether it's just the everyday leaders. I think we all have ways to learn. And in today's world, learning and growing together and from each other is critical. So, long-winded way of saying thank you, and long-winded way of saying if you like this content, let us know, subscribe, share, let other people know. But as always, want to thank you for being engaged with us, and thank you for leaning in, leaders.